Tonight's raffle has been provided by your board of directors, and our refreshments by Desmond Gallagher and Priscilla Vanderpass and Kathy Wilcox Barn, and we really appreciate that very much. Everybody got the raffle ticket? If not, Wayne's in the back, willing to accept your dollars to do that. Coming up next year, we have already booked all 11 months with presenters. We have some pretty good topics and speakers. January is Lizzie Lowry, they'll be talking about the Civil War era clothing. And then also in February, Karen Anderson, who is a linguist and will be sharing with us on the Maidu language. I'm going to dispense with introductions. Amigos Bob, I think everybody probably knows him. We want to get right onto the program. So, Amigos, come on down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for inviting me, Dan, and the Historical Society. I'm honored to be here. I've traveled all over the world as a speaker and almost never spoken in the county I live in.
Does it say any speakers?
So there's a lot to talk about Felix Gillet. As Dan mentioned to me, I have 200 slides there. We're not going to look at them all, obviously, because I stay till midnight and we just talk ad nauseum. And there's quite a bit of pieces about Felix Gillet, which I am not going to go into tonight. He actually had a whole bunch of tentacles into our community. The part I'm most personally interested in is his agricultural endeavors. But in addition to that, which, speaking of the Searles Library, here was one of the pictures that Pat made for us that we're using. In addition to his agricultural work, Felix was a two-term city councilman. He was a founder of the State Department of Horticulture, which is now the Department of Food and Agriculture. He was an extensive writer, both in English and in French, and did sociology writings as well as agricultural writings, and a whole bunch of other things. A real interesting character. He was the Nevada County chair of the Working Men's Party, which seems to be their main turn-of-the-century platform, was to get all the Chinese out of Nevada City, or out of California, rather. And he's also at least attributed with the efforts of Nevada City to purchase the reservoir that's at the top of North Bloomfield Road, which ended up which was a private reservoir, which ended up becoming the water source for Nevada City that provided pressurized water into town. The town stopped burning down. Before that, they had to pump the water out of Deer Creek, and of course, anything that was up above Deer Creek had no pressure, and it burned down many times. So they put a pressurized line in from that reservoir, which was fed by a mining ditch, and the town stopped burning down. And as a result of that, they moved the city hall from down at Deer Creek, which is where that building is right next to the freeway that's been occupied by multiple restaurants. They moved it up to where it currently is, and Gillet is recognized on a plaque. Anyway, lots more stuff about him. I could talk about him for hours because he did a lot of different things. I am a farmer and a farming activist, and I've done a lot of different things related to agriculture, and Felix Gillet is my personal inspiration for a lot of what I do, but I didn't know that. So here's the gentleman. He's born in 1835 in Rochefort, France, and migrated here in 1859 or 8, depending on who you read. He opened one of the early barber shops in Nevada City on Pine Street, and as most small farmers, maintained his primary career while he established his agricultural career. He went back to France in the 1860s and learned about the nursery trade and made contacts, came back here, bought a piece of land up on Aristocracy Hill, which is off of Nevada Street, where Nursery Street is. 16 acres of land. In 1871, started his nursery and kept his barbershop going until the 1880s. As a classic, just like I have an outside job to support my farming addiction, the same way it was back in the 1870s. So Felix started what turns out to be one of the first nurseries in California. We called it Barren Hill Nursery, and I'm hoping to get a picture transcribed that I found now that's at his original house that shows the property when he bought it. It had a single pine tree on it. It was essentially a barren hill. It had been logged over and probably mined as well, and so he got it for a song, but it had water access to it, and that was probably one of the most important parts. But one of the interesting things about Gillet is that he recognized that we don't have that great a soil. Everybody that's ever gardened around here knows that. And yet he could figure out a way to coax growth out of plants. And if they grew well in Nevada City on poor soil, he was pretty clear that they would grow in other parts of the country. As it turned out, so he ran this nursery till 1908, and there are different versions of how he passed, but he got an infection and died from, I like to believe he was pruning a tree in the winter and fell out of it. In January of 1908 he passed. He's one of the few citizens of Nevada County at that time who was on the front page of the obituary, so he was highly respected in the time, front page of the Union, that is. So from 1871 to 1908, he ran his nursery, and then Charles Parsons took it over a couple years later from Gillet's widow and ran it, him and his son, until the 1960s. And in the 1960s, it was the oldest operating nursery in California. It is one of the very first nurseries. There was one previously in Nevada County, and there was one major one in near Fremont called the California Nursery, if I remember correctly. But Gillet had a real interesting piece of the puzzle. Being French, he had these connections back into France, which at the time, and still to a great degree, was the culinary capital of Europe. And he brought in these plants, many of which he selected or learned about from the nursery people. Apparently, we still don't know the details of that, how he did this. But he brought plants here originally by bringing them around the Horn on ship. And you'll see in Mr. Parsons' description about how that happened in that handout that Dan gave you earlier. And basically brought these plants in, propagated them, planted them out in a wide variety of areas, and got feedback from people about how they grew. And as he learned more and more, then he evolved his nursery and continued to do things. So in 1967, when Parsons passed on, the nursery closed, but the legacy of the property was maintained because Mr. Parsons sold it to a couple that kept the house intact. And I'll explain a little more of this. But what Gillet did, which is the part that's most intriguing to me, is many, and I'm going to show you this as quickly as I can, many of the things which we take for granted today as crops of California or Oregon or Washington or Idaho or western agriculture areas actually came to the West by Felix Gillet. He brought them here, bred them, propagated them, and got farmers and gardeners to plant them. So why were people interested in this? Well, of course, the miners came here, and the miners themselves needed to be sustained. And so agriculture sprung up to keep the miners happy, and many miners brought plants with them. And in our work, we found a number of plants from miners, from others besides Gillet. But then Gillet came here and spurred that process on by becoming the local resource. So if you wanted to plant an apple, a fig, a cherry, a peach, a plum, a chestnut, a walnut, whatever, or you wanted to have an orchard, as we found certain orchards, then here's the local source. And it turned out that he was a wise guy, apparently, because many of the plants that he brought here are either the exact same varieties we grow today, or they're the parents of the varieties we grow today. And I'll show you this as we go along. So he's the primary source for all these plants. Oops, sorry. So things like almonds, walnuts, chestnuts, filberts, prunes, the European plums, wine table and raisin grapes, strawberries, pears, cherries, figs, apricots, peaches, quince, apples, roses, currants, gooseberries, and a bunch of other things. If you eat those things, you are connected to Felix Gillet. There is no doubt about it. He is the guy that brought the majority of these plants here. Now, what we've been doing, and I'll show you as we go along here, so this is Felix's house, which is still standing, and it's been built and refurbished. And that's Seth, one of our group of the Felix Gillet Institute, doing a little evaluation. This is actually, the back of the house was an attached solar greenhouse, and these French doors provided heat and air exchange. Now it's been converted into an arbor. But this actually, we have a picture of it, which I haven't got into yet, that shows Felix standing in the back of this greenhouse, propagating. We're not quite sure what it looks like, maybe walnuts in glass cylinders, which I've yet to find another one of those. But for some reason, that was his preferred plant or propagating technique. At any rate, he had 16 acres of plants. That is a tremendous amount of nursery production. Right now, our little nursery is about a quarter acre, and it's got about 1,500 plants in it.
Wow.
So if you take that quarter acre and multiply it out, you can see the quantity of plants that he provided. So, and this is just one. This happens to be that one actually grows right there on the house, in front of the house. That's the Bear Claire Go. And my fiance Jennifer Bliss, who's out in the back room there, is actually becoming our resident expert on identifying these old varieties, which is extremely challenging and frustrating, as she tells me at 2 in the morning when she's trying to figure out these different apples that she's been looking at for her eyes crossed. But we have been trying to both find out what these old plants are and then try to evaluate them, and the best of them, we're propagating them. So this is just one example of. So when I first went to this property in 1983 or 4, I noticed that the entrance was a plaque, and it says, for those who can't read it, here lived and worked Felix Gillet, a Frenchman by birth, an American by adoption, born from 1871 to 1908, through whose vision and perseverance the horticulture of the world was enriched by the propagation and culture of walnuts, filberts, chestnuts, and prunes. In commemoration of his work, this thing was set March 1933 by the Women's Civic Club in Nevada City, California. So when I drove up to this place for the first time, which I learned about from a customer of mine. I'm the man that started Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, and people used to come out there and all the time and buy trees from me. I was propagating all kinds of, it turned out to be a bunch of Gillet trees. I didn't know it at the time. But and someone said, did you know that there was a nursery in Nevada City? And I said, no, I know nothing about it. And he said, well, yeah, go to Nevada Street and you can go on Nursery Street. Well, duh, on Nursery Street. And lo and behold, there are a couple of pillars, one of which has got this on it, and I entered into what turned out to be now, well, an even longer odyssey. So my part of this, the part I brought to this conversation is I know a bunch about agriculture, and apparently other people who did history didn't know as much about ag or hadn't been around as long and didn't recognize all the contributions he did to agriculture. But so in 1970, Carl, raise your hand here, Carl, didn't own that property at the time, but I ended up on Buck's Ranch. And Buck's Ranch, those of you know that is Orleans Flat is, one of the mining camps, hydraulic mining camps of the San Juan Ridge. I ended up at Buck's Ranch in 1970, driving down this dirt road with a bunch of my hippie friends. I bought this property in 1970 on the Middle Fork, and we were 12 miles down a dirt road, and then we open up out of the forest, and there is an orchard, which I'll show you. And I had no idea at that time the age of it or its connection to Mr. Gillet, except that it had fantastic fruit. And if we could beat the bears to it, we had an overabundance of stuff to eat. But the bears had been eating it apparently for 100 years, so they were, and still are, quite wise. So that little project, or that little experience in my subsequent years, that was an abandoned property at that point. Carl bought it more recently. But we would go into those trees and harvest off the apples and the pears and the figs, or not the figs, the prunes and the other trees that are out there, and got fascinated by this without knowing anything about the historical context of it, which I'll tell you in a bit. So then, many years later, I started this Felix Gillet project because I've now put 40-odd years into this, and I'm totally fascinated by the guy. And so what we are doing is to do further research and try to get preservation of the plants and propagate the best of those so that people will plant them back. Just like people are all excited about heirloom tomatoes, I farmed before anyone ever called, and there wasn't an heirloom tomato. That was grandma's tomato. Now that's a big deal. Well, the same thing can be said for heirloom fruits and nuts. They just haven't basically been fully appreciated yet. And what we have learned, and I'll show you, is that we have literally thousands of these plants in our counties that have survived 100 or more years. We've got some that are 140 years old that we documented by the fact that they were, that you can see the tree on a picture from a property that was once a stage stock. So plants go back a long ways. Gillet was 140 years ago in operation. So this is what we do, and then I'll tell you about Felix in a bit. So we're doing this project as a nonprofit, and I'm going to hand out some literature so you can hear some more about what we're doing and read about us, or go to our website. Thanks to Adam in the back there who got the website up this year. So we've identified more than 625 locations, okay, in the Sierra foothills, comprising over 2,000 specimens, and there's probably a lot more than that, most of which we have yet to fully identify. So those 625 locations are spread between Sierra, Yuba, Nevada, Placer, and El Dorado counties, and I have literally just scratched the surface. Every day every week someone says, did you know about, and I go, I never heard that place, and then you put it on the list. We're a long ways away from having identification of all those 2,000 plus trees, but we are bit by bit each year collecting up more information. So we do that, and then Adam, raise your hand. You're going to meet him in the back. Adam's going to be out in the foyer. We're going to have a fruit tasting, and if all goes well, a chestnut tasting here at the end of the talk. So they work on identification, and they brought some of the books they use for IDing. This is extremely challenging, from finding out things that are 150 years old, what they are, but we're figuring them out bit by bit. And then we have an educational training program, which we're starting up in high schools, and we do fruit tastings and education. This year, our nursery providing almost 75 different varieties of plants this winter, all different kinds of things that we've evaluated, identified, and can give you a history connection to where they came from and what the history of that site is to the best of our knowledge. So this is living history. Many people are fascinated with it. I mean, I love the Bridgeport Bridge, do not get me wrong, but all over Bridgeport are a whole bunch of really cool old plants which most people just ignore. They just go, yeah, there's figs over there, and oh, there's a mock orange over there, and there's a walnut over there, and there's a fig over there, and they walk right by them. But in fact, those have just as much historical importance as the buildings do. And finally, here's the good news, State Parks is interested in this subject, and we're actually doing, for the State Parks at Malakoff-Diggins, a survey of a bunch of the old plants, trying to identify them and determine their health and what they need to survive. And in fact, we're actually getting the ball rolling with the intent of getting the state parks and other public agencies really interested in these heirloom plants, which are just as viable and important as are the old buildings, but they have been neglected. But the cool thing is these things produce even if they're neglected. And this is really important because now we have all kinds of high-tech ways to farm. You know, we got sprays and waters and fertilizers and pruning. These plants haven't seen any of that for 100 years or more, and given a decent weather year, they throw a huge crop. Like, on their own. They're basically gone wild. So that means that that's the kind of genetics that you can take to your place and without having to deal with them every single day, get some fruit off of them. And if you want to deal with them, you can make even more. So we sell them in the winter, dormant and bare root, and in the future we're going to have more things as we keep finding. And out on the outside, we have some of Gillet's catalogs, and you can read and see some of what his work does, which has given us the background, this information. So anyway, here we go. So you're going to have to rush through this. So this is how we do this. We go to a tree. This happened to be in Downeyville on Commercial Street next to the church. Pick the cherries, take an ID, and then we take it back and we test the sugars for it. We evaluate it by flavors. We do a fruit tasting. We try to identify it by the variety. And then as best we can, once we identify it, then we say, and we evaluate it. Well, there's I think 17 or 18 different cherries on that table right there. That was just one picking this summer from 17 different trees on 17 different sites. So from that, then you pick through those, you go, that one's really cool. Now this year we found the best cherry we've ever found. So we're really excited about that. One's one growing in Camptonville. But every year we keep going around, looking around for more kinds of varieties in different sites. And by the way, we're looking for your help on that. You never know, old plants. Way into the conversation, as you might be able to tell. So here's Adam and Jennifer doing apple ID work. This just a couple of weeks ago. So we spread these all out and we spend literally hours and days. Some of these things take a tremendous amount of effort because they're very similar out there. And Jennifer and Adam are becoming experts in a field with nobody in it. Turns out there's virtually nobody. Experts don't exist on this particular conversation. We're using 150-year-old books with line drawings to try and figure this stuff out. This is extremely challenging work. So here's what we do then. Once we find a plant, then we go out, and I'm in this case taking a cutting. This is up in Forest City. In the winter, we take a dormant cutting off of the mother tree that we now have identified, decided it's a really good one, and then we're going to take it back. This is Dan Crubben, our chief propagator, and Dan does the propagation and Adam as well. And Dan's doing a class here teaching people how to graft. In this case, it's a cherry tree. And so we do these propagation. We start with what's known as a rootstock and graft on a scion, which is this part here. This is the part that came from the mother tree. This is the part that we grow as the rootstock that provides the vigor and the health and the protection. And this ensures when you graft it, this holds the same genetics of the parent, and therefore whatever you started with off that cherry is going to be the same thing on the next generation. And then we grow that out in the nursery for a year, and then they're ready for people to plant. So here we're doing a class. We do these fruit tastings. I'm going to do one version of that tonight, and in the future we're hoping to do this a lot more, because now we're finding a lot more varieties and try to get people excited about some of these unique things. For example, anyone who's ever grown apples or pears knows that they're plagued with diseases. They're also plagued with codling moth. That's the worm that gets inside of the apple or the pear. Well, we found varieties that don't get the codling moth. They're growing just fine, thank you, all 100 years later with no worms in them or no disease in them. Turns out that nobody knows this in the world of plant genetics. I've been checking with folks that are experts in the subject going, no, we didn't know there was genetic resistance to codling moth. We found it, I can guarantee it. So as we go along and you go, oh, that's a really good variety, and by the way, you don't have to spray it and you don't get worms. Wow. Bonus! And gee, if you get started with some water, which every plant needs to get going, eventually these things will naturalize, and you don't have to force them everywhere. Every fruit out there on that table, plus hundreds of more varieties that we picked, except for one that's out there, came from wild trees. This year, that didn't get any care at all. Zip. They're just what we collected off them. And this is a hard year. We didn't have rain from January on effectively, and yet these things have a nice crop. So here we're doing, this is at the Heirloom Expo, and this is the kind of things we do for education, put all different kinds of stuff, get people excited about Felix. And here we're making juice up in Forest City, because we try to turn these things into value-added products too, because also it's valuable to eat these things, but if you can turn them into juice or jam or jelly or wine, then there's a whole other hard cider. And here's Abby out collecting chestnuts. We'll talk about that in a bit. So, here's things you can do to help us, just to give you a quickie before I run into the Felix stuff. You can become a member. You can tell us about old plants you know about. We keep a database. We may not get there this year, but we'll put you in the database and we'll come find it eventually. You can donate to our nonprofits. You can buy our plants, which is really important. We're expanding now, and I'm hoping we can sell all these darn things. And then volunteer for fruit explorations and nursery work. We like to go out as groups and do this stuff. It's fun. You go out and go, wow, what's that? Let's pick some. Oh, that one tastes fantastic. Or, oh, that one sounds great. And then you work your way through it. And then you can also help us spread the word. So, here's the story. Buck's Ranch, a 4,200-foot elevation in Orleans Flat, gold mining. In 1868, the Buck brothers moved into town, or moved out there in the woods, and started planting all kinds of stuff to sell to the local miners on the ridge, and to feed themselves. And I rediscovered this, and I'm not the only one that's been out there, obviously, but I stumbled into this in 1970. And here it is, as it is today. Carl's been doing a great job of renovating the place. The house was a total wreck, and most of the orchard was as well. But there's all kinds on this property of fruit trees that are still from approximately the 1870s, 1880s. Now this is at 4,200 feet, and other than Carl going in at one point and doing some pruning on it, they've really been uncared for 100 years. And the bears tackle them, but they don't get irrigated, they don't get sprayed, they don't get thinned, they don't get watered, they don't get any of that stuff, and they grow just fine. And here's a few examples of plants. Some of these I have names on. Swar, that's a variety of apple we really like. It's not showing up quite so great here, I apologize. This is white pippin, which is related, many people eat the Newtown pippin, that's the pippin today. Turns out there's dozens of kinds of pippins. And so you have to identify through those ones. And there's the Calvel Rouge, which I think we have a few on the table. That's a fantastic French variety that's still considered one of the culinary pinnacles of French apple. This is a close-up of a Calvel Rouge. Or a yellow bellflower, a fantastic apple, a predecessor of Golden Delicious. Very similar, actually, in many ways. So in addition to the 70-plus apple trees, Buck's Ranch has got all these other cool plants. So at any rate, and I can't prove this, there's no genetic ID that says they came from Felix, but I can tell you that he had all these varieties in his catalog. There wasn't anybody else around here at that point in time growing those things, so it's a pretty high likelihood that they came from Gillet's orchard, or Gillet's nursery. So I stumbled on that. I've been picking that off and on there for 40 odd years. Carl and Alexis go in there. Now we just this year really did a good job of surveying and identifying virtually every variety in there. It was really challenging, but now we have a good map and we're starting to get all the details of this. So as you can tell, this is a 40-year-old project that I'm just getting going. So when I got turned on to the nursery, when I was sent up there to the Gallaghers to visit them, they were living in the house, and they were a little bit shy about talking with me, honestly. They said, "Who's this woolly guy that came here and wants to know about Felix Gillet?" And so it took me 4 or 5 visits with them until they finally softened up and realized that I wasn't there to do any damage, but in fact that I was really, truly interested in the botany and the history of the place. And at one point in time, they said, "Would you like to look in this box that we have?" And I went, "Yeah, sure." And in that box started what turns out to be the documentation of all this other pieces that we're still piecing together. And this is one of his catalogs. Felix was prolific. He put a catalog out every year since the 1870s until he passed away. And some of them had 20 and 30 pages in them. Others were shorter. We don't have all the catalogs. Anybody finds some catalogs, I'm always interested because every now and then we'll find a catalog where he only had the variety for a few years. And then that moved out and got other ones in. But in that process, I learned a whole bunch about what he was growing and what he was really into. For example, this was 1886. He was promoting mulberry trees and silkworms. In the historical library, Searles Library, there's a great document on the mulberry industry of Nevada County of the 1860s. Mr. Gillet was the nurseryman stimulating, trying to get a silkworm industry, a silk industry going here in the county in the 1880s. So Felix was the French connection. That was his start. He went to France and started bringing stuff over, but then eventually it'll be documented. He brought things from all over the world. And a lot of what we have in our county is cosmopolitan, like the human beings. We came from a lot of places. The plants came from a lot of places. And these, we now know where a lot of these plants are from, but we're still learning. There's a ton more to learn. So figs, just an example, and this just go on, I could talk for days about all the plants he brought here. This is in Bridgeport. That's one of those plants that's basically left to go by itself. And we go out there and pick it. Now we know what it is. It's called the Saint Jean. Here's just some, see, at 16 in the catalogs we found so far, 16 different varieties of figs. The one that's the most, Black of San Jose, is still popular grown. Black Mission, that's the most common black fig you get as a dried fig or a fresh fig. Adriatics are the most common white figs still grown. But a bunch of these are still grown by people commercially and, most importantly, by gardeners. So there's the Saint Jean. Here's right here on American Hill in Nevada City, the French Paillard. Jennifer could pronounce it better than I. That's what it looks like on the inside. There is, now these are Adriatics, yeah. That's an Adriatic fig. Those are fantastic white figs, some of the best. That's what it looks like on the inside. And there's the Black Mission, or known as the Black of San Jose, which Felix got from the San Jose Mission. Then he brought it up, propagated, became known as the Black Mission. So Felix got a lot of these plants from other places. So one of the things is it's hard to find these things. So I go out at the bloom times of the year when there's not many leaves on anything else looking. So I drive around and walk around. People tell me this is out in Campbellville where I found these cherry trees, which once everything foliates in, you can't see them anymore because a lot of these plants have been encroached upon by nature. People cleared out the land like they did back in the day, and then a lot of the stuff got abandoned, and here comes the pine trees, or like at Gillet's property, it's almost all overgrown back with the native plants. And yet, in the native plants, there's a fantastic collection of introduced plants. So, cherries. People love cherries. This is Felix's 26, this is all, we only did something in 1891, there may be more. 26 varieties, but here's just to give you some idea. This one right here, the Bigarelle Gros de Mizelle, you know it as the baby, okay? Or the Black Tartarian, that's still being grown. Or the Napoleon Bigaroo, those are still being grown. The Royal Anne, that's the parent of the Rainier cherry. Those blush cherries that people eat, and they took the Royal Anne and bred it with another cherry and created the more modern variety of the Rainier. Well, we have tons of really great cherries in Nevada County, which if the weather doesn't get them and the birds don't get them, we actually get a chance to harvest them. So this is a tree out, this is the Guigne Marbris out in Lake City, State Park property. And this is an example of why it's so important to work on this. So that's about 1995 when I was out there picking. That's a 14-foot long ladder, just to give you a sense of the size of that tree. And here's what it looked like a couple years ago. So this is what happens when plants get old. Now I got the parks interested finally in pruning this tree, so hopefully this year we'll get it taken care of so it won't deteriorate any farther. But these trees aren't going to live forever, and some of them need to be renovated, others need to be repropagated, which is what we're going to do with the parks, is propagate the endangered ones and get them to plant them back so that we have a history lesson that goes on decades. So there it is close up. This is in North Columbia. That's the Bigaroo Gros de Mazel, which we call the Bing now. That's the Coughlin property, or it was until the current owners cut it down not that long ago. There's a cherry and a rose in Lake City, which we have yet to identify the rose, but it's also from the Gillet collection. Gillet did lots of cherries, lots of roses. I'll just flip through these. These are all different kinds of cherries. There's a Royal Anne in Downeyville. Here's a picture also from the Source Historical Library. This is the kind of crock you used to get in the 1800s from a cherry. That's phenomenal. So here we are. Actually, this tree was so tall it prompted me to buy what's known as a cherry picker truck. Which I didn't have enough money to buy it, so I haven't done that yet. But I really want to donate some money so I can buy a cherry picker so we can get to the top of these 40-foot trees. That'd be awesome. But let's see, now cherries are interesting, but grapes are even more interesting. Who drinks wine in this room? Okay, let me see if any of these varieties strike your fancy. How about the Cabernet Sauvignon, or the Chardonnay, or the Merlot, or the Gamay, or Medoc, Cabernet of Medoc. These are all Felix introductions. Muscats, Petit Syrah, Pinot Burgundy, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, Tempranillo, Zinfandel, Viognier. Anybody done that? Anybody ever drink any of those? You drank Felix Gillet. Felix Gillet brought those plants, with the exception of Zinfandel. That's the only plant we know for sure came from somebody else. I went to the wine library, the experts at Davis, and threw down an 1886 catalog of Felix's and said, so do you know where all those varieties that you guys are all into came from? And they went, no. And I said, so look here. How about this guy? And they went, huh? Who's he? So Felix Gillet turns out to be almost unknown in the plant world even. And yet I turned out to be the guy for some reason to kind of go, wait a minute, this is a connection. All these wine grapes we drink, and not only that, but he had 100 other varieties which are still being grown in other parts of the world and to some degree in the United States. So if you drank wine, you drank his. Or how about if you ate a table grape? You ever eat a Thompson seedless table grape? Almost everybody did that. That is the, that's the kishmish. That's from Afghanistan. Felix brought it here and sold it to Mr. Thompson at the Sutter Buttes. Mr. Thompson made it famous as the Thompson seedless. And so that's the foundation of all the white and yellow grapes we grow in the United States. But it goes on. The Muscat Alexandria, the orange flowered muscat, which is used for the cooler muscats, the Zante seedless currant, tokais, white corns, all these are still being grown. And that's, again, just a small selection. You had 50 other varieties of table grapes. He was a plant maniac. In one catalog, he had 241 varieties of grapes. 241 varieties. Today, you go to a nursery, you're happy to get 10. So he was totally into diversity and getting people to plant them and getting the feedback. So wine grapes, so then we find these different kinds of wine grapes, and I'll just sit through these and not belabor. That's in Nevada City, an old property. There's one over in Lowell Hill, up in Placer County. Walnuts. If you eat a walnut, you ate Felix Gillet. That's actually documented by the walnut industry. The walnut industry traced its history back, and the Franquette walnut, which was one of his varieties, is the foundation variety which is still grown today commercially, and the parent of virtually all of the rest of the walnuts grown in California, which is the United States' largest producer of dragons. So if you ate a walnut, you got a Felix Gillet. And in the lobby, we're going to serve some another variety, which we actually think is a better one, which I've now just forgotten the name of it. Come back to me a second. And it grows on a tree. Yeah, well, I'll just show you longer. So here's how walnuts can grow. That's a Franquette. That was planted in the late 1800s in Rio Oso down in the valley. Here's a close-up of it. The farmer is farming it. And what's interesting here is Felix realized that this is the fruiting part of the walnut here. Up here and down here is what's called a Northern California black. That's a native walnut. And it turns out that the Persian walnut are called the English walnut. Have you heard it called the English walnut? Yeah. You know what? There's no walnuts in England. Walnuts came from France and from Iran and Iraq. From Iran and Iraq to France and France to California. But guess what there is? There's the English ranch up in North Columbia that's full of walnut trees. So I think, my theory is the English walnut got named after the English ranch. Because there are not English edible walnuts. It doesn't exist. But anyway, English walnuts or Persian walnuts do not survive in the soils around here. And when Felix realized that, he grafted them to a hardy native plant, the black walnut, and it turned out that that gave the vigor to tolerate the weather and the rains and the droughts and the culinary quality of the English walnut on top. So the sugar, that was what I was trying to say. This is the one we're going to be serving up. And this is a fantastic walnut growing in North San Juan. You can see how big it is. And there's the nuts. We have some of this on display. Here's one we haven't figured out yet. And what's cool about it, it's got the giantest leaves I've ever seen. I mean, what the heck is that? That's a walnut. This is also from the source collection. We don't know that for sure Felix had this commission, but who else would have paid to get a picture of a walnut seed? We're thinking it's Felix. He also was an extensive writer. He taught people about agriculturalists and gardeners and farmers on how to propagate and take care of these plants. He wrote little booklets on the subject, including, I'm just jumping ahead here, he wrote this on walnuts, a whole chapter on it, on their values, how to grow them, the problems with them. He wrote regularly in the ag mags of the day. He was really into a lot of stuff. His fingers in all of our agriculture. I mean, he's not known, which is kind of sad, but I'm working on that. So this is variety. Everybody show me one of these. I'm giving you money for this one. I might give you a lot. We've been looking for this for 3 decades.
Wow.
This is a cluster walnut. No one's seen one. He featured it in his catalog for years. It didn't survive, maybe, but walnuts typically grow 1 or 2 or 3 together. This grows like a grape cluster. Somebody finds me one of those, I'm going to give you some special prize. So these are some of his. Now this chestnut out here is actually, we're going to eat those. If Adam gets out, you're not going to do it. We're not doing that.
What time is it?
Oh, you're getting too late. It's 10 days.
Oh, okay.
I cut you fascinating. We have some chestnuts out there you can taste raw if you want to. We also have some you can take home to roast yourself. It's the best chestnut there is that we've ever tasted. But these are some of his different walnuts from early years. And then just he made these different descriptions and stuff. It goes on. So if you've ever eaten a chestnut, at least the ones grown in the United States, you ate a Felix Gillet. The main one that's still propagated, he didn't even list in his catalog. Mr. Parsons, when he took it over, renamed it and called it the Colossal. Well, the Colossal's an okay variety. The best one is this Marron de Leon, at least from our experience. This Marron de Leon, it's got the best flavor and it's the biggest nut. And we're propagating those now. So that's one growing like Adam down there. That's how big that tree is. And that's, I can take it all in the picture. And that's growing at Cantisano. There is the Marron de Leon. Fantastic nut. Really sweet. We zip through these. Here's one growing right in downtown Nevada City. That's the Marron de Quercy, another variety. There's another one across the street from it. Here's the Colossal, which was a Quercy, growing in Grass Valley over there at North Star. Yeah, thank you. Here's an orchard that we lease in Brownsville that came from Gillet's nursery stock. It's a couple acres of chestnuts. There's the American chestnut, which there are virtually none of those left in the United States. If you know anything about the history of chestnuts, they were the most prolific hardwood on the East Coast, but they got killed by a blight in the early 1900s. And we've got some of them out here in California, and everybody's pretty interested in that. They're small and super sweet, and when they dry out, they taste like maple sugar. But they're tiny, and so people don't buy them because they go, they're tiny. Well, it turns out the flavor was the good part of this. Look at the size. We're also trying to turn it extra value. That's taking chestnut and turning it into valuable wood for various uses. A board foot of chestnut, that's 1 inch thick by 1 foot by 1 foot, is $30 to $80.
Wow.
Okay. And in Nevada City, 2 of them got cut down and turned into firewood in the 90s. 2 of them in Empire Mine got cut down and turned into firewood in the 2000s. Because people didn't realize they're actually super valuable plants. Horse chestnut, another one that Gillet had. Filberts, you ever ate a filbert? You ate a Felix Gillet. The variety of choice still is the Barcelona and the Duchilly, these two varieties, and the Babiana. Most chestnuts, primarily filberts, are grown in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. Felix got some planted around here, we found some of them, but the climate here is too hot for them. They do better, and he introduced them into the Oregon Willamette Valley, and he is credited with establishing their industry as the father of the filbert or hazelnut industry of the West Coast. So there's a filbert. These are Barcelona, these are all local, those are the nuts. This is a cool ornamental. We had a purple-leaved one. It actually looks purple, the nut's purplish, everything's purple. It grows right there at the Gillet property. Almonds. If you have eaten an almond, you have eaten Felix Gillet. Felix Gillet brought the varieties here which became the foundation. The Duchesse or Duchess is the main one, the improved longwood up, and the IXL became the parents of the nonpareil, and the nonpareil is the standard even today of all almonds being grown in California, the premier place on the planet for growing almonds. That's Felix Gillet. Pardon? Almonds originally came from Iran and Iraq. And then they came to France, and then they came to California by Mr. Gillet. So here's some almonds growing in Nevada City. This is above their natural value and where they'll produce consistently. I've been following these trees since the 80s, and about once every 5 years we get a rotate crop on them. They just don't, it's too high of elevation, too rainy, too cold. This is an almond orchard of nonpareils in Cape Hay. It's pushing 100 years old, and it's still thriving in the Cape Hay Valley of Western Woodland. Moving along, shagbark hickories, we have those, pecans, you did pecans. How about prunes? You ever ate a prune? You probably ate, and I never can pronounce it, but a clarac mammoth d'Int, which all the farmers end up calling it the French prune. You can imagine why. The French prune is the standard of the industry today. If you ate a prune today, you ate a French prune, you ate that variety right there, I almost guarantee you. And that's Felix. He brought him here. He got people to plant him. So, and it goes on. That's a tree in Graniteville, 5,000 foot, still producing prunes. Got 100 plus years old. And that's just moved right through. These are all different plates of different varieties you have. Pears. You ate a pear? You ever ate a Bartlett pear? Sure you have. He called it the Bon Chrétien. That's, in French, is the variety that's now known as the Bartlett. Or let's see, an Anjou, or a Basque. Oh, what's the Basque? Yeah, Bear Gris, a Basques. There's Bear Clairgeau, that goes out in front of his house. Winter Nellis, Seckles, these are still all in commercial production. These are all Felix Gillet. Barton Sachs is showing a few different varieties. Now, these are all from trees that aren't cared for, so they have blemishes. If you take care of them, they look really fantastic. But we're basically going out into the wild and harvesting. There's a winter Nellis. All of these grow here are just fantastic. Pears are fantastic trees for here. There are a 350-year-old pear tree in France. It's a shrine.
Wow.
So they last a long time. And they're producing 140 years later. Last year was a fantastic crop on pears. This year is not so great. Last year was amazing. Just huge on these trees that are 100 plus years old. Without any care. There's a winter Nellis in Graniteville. I just zipped through these apples. You ate any apples? You probably ate something from Felix. A lot, and he had all different varieties, a lot of which are still being grown. And there's some of them, we have some outside, Spitzenberg and the Grosse Pea and the Winter Permay. Here's a tree that's 140 years old, 130 years old. There's one in Humbug. I think that was in Forest. There's one in Forest City. Somebody tried to keep the bears out. Yeah, it doesn't work. See all that broken lineage? That's bear damage. Bears are really prolific. There's one in Dutch Flat. We're starting to get into Dutch Flat's got a lot of really cool plants that we're just getting over there now. This one's up in Canterville. This is a fantastic variety, Rhode Island Greening. It's kind of the predecessor of the Pippins, and it's a great applesauce variety. That one gets a little bit of water. Just zipping through here to show you more of these. There's zillions of them. I've talked about all these for hours. So this one's got an interesting story. This is a winter pearmain. I found this story in the history of Dutch Flat. It turns out there was a man farming in Lowell Hill, which is just across the canyon from Dutch Flat on the ridge, across the Bear River. This gentleman got written up because he shipped these apples to the Tsar of France, of Russia in the 1890s. The guy bought 200 boxes and sent them to Russia, which is just phenomenal, since the actual original home of apples is Kazakhstan, which is right on the border of Russia. But they shipped them, so we nicknamed this one Fit for the Tsar, because it apparently matched up, and he was really raving about it. Persimmons, you ever ate a persimmon? Here's one from Camptonville called a shiro, or this is the more common one, hachias, which we have some out there. Roses, I'm not a rose person yet, but rosarians show up and say, whoa, wait a minute, we show them the list. They go, oh, this guy had the foundation of the entire rose industry of what we now have as all our modern roses. And we have a long list of all the introduced, I'll show you. And if you know roses, you go, oh yeah, I know those, because a lot of them are still being grown, and they're the parents of what's being grown. France was really into roses, as it turns out. So you can see a lot of stuff was from France. Let's see what else. We're moving right along. I don't have all these ideas out yet. Sorry, we're just zipping through here. Some of these are in various botanical gardens. This one's out in Lake City. We call it Lake City Sunshine. Prunes and plums. So if you ate plums, he's way into plums. Kinds of plums. This is in Humbug or Malakoff Diggins. Mulberries, as I mentioned earlier, are the big-time mulberry effort. We're trying to people plant mulberries. And here was his article, one of them about raising mulberries for silkworms. He actually was written up in a book on the subject. He was an expert in the moment. Had these different kinds of silkworms. Quinces, apricots. I mean, it just goes on and on. Peaches. That was also from the historical library. Peaches. These are a bunch of these are the parents of what we still eat today in the world of peaches. Some of them are American varieties like Hales Early. Cling peaches, that's the candy type, that's a tree. Campbellville, that's a tree. Nectarines, just zip along. Oh, about citrus. This isn't a place to grow citrus, but Felix was growing and selling citrus at one time. Olives. This is an orchard I used to harvest and take care of in Newcastle. It's a Provence olive. It came from Felix apparently. There's some of its varieties. There we are pressing them for oil. Strawberries. Oh, here's a good story. We're getting out of time. Every strawberry you ever ate owes its parentage to Mr. Gillet. And here's how it works. Mr. Gillet brought over these varieties from England and France, Holland, 34 varieties in this one particular group. What's interesting about these varieties from Europe was that they were very flavorful, but the fruit was generally small and soft. And so it was good for home gardening. It was good for local sales. Well, Mr. Gillet sold or sent some of these plant material to a man named Mr. Etter in Ettersburg in Humboldt County. And Mr. Etter crossed these French varieties with the California beach strawberry and a Chilean wild relative and created the firm, large, tasty strawberry that is the strawberry industry of California. And it traces its history back to Mr. Gillet. So yeah, he just had tons of stuff. Oh, he wrote this great book on growing strawberries. Now, I read this book in 1985, and I can tell you it was written in 1876, I think. It was exactly early 1800s. We still do most of the same practices 100 years later. It's the same, we do the same way. And anyway, wrote all that. And then there's different publications, all kinds. I know this is kind of overwhelming. Like I said, this is a big topic. Raspberries came from Mr. Gillet. Blackberries, flowering cherries, that's their Ike's. Currants and gooseberries. He had one catalog, he had 64 kinds of gooseberry. I never ate a gooseberry that was more than just one kind. He had 64 kinds of. And then just some other things that he had. He was definitely a plant maniacal human being. Or like the weeping redwood. Who's ever seen one of those? Growing at his property. Or holly. You see a lot of holly around town? That's Mr. Gillet. So, I'm going to wrap this up by saying that history of what we're doing and what we eat is connected to Mr. Gillet. Now, he didn't get the street credibility. His wife didn't live a long time and promote him. He was 25 years before Mr. Burbank. And as a result, Mr. Burbank actually got a lot of plant material from him. I brought the Burbank Society here, and they went, oh, we always wonder where Burbank got some of this stuff. And I went, yeah, there it is. And Burbank called it something else. Burbank's wife, he married a woman 50 years his junior, late in his life, and she lived until the 70s, and she pumped out stuff about Burbank for 50 more years after he passed. Well, nobody did that for Mr. Gillet. Mr. Gillet pretty much died in anonymity. And that's why I feel my job is to partly get him out of anonymity, but even more importantly, get people aware of the value of these old plants and get us back into planting them so that we have healthy stock that's resistant to the diseases and the snow and the hot spells. You know, we're all worried about global warming. Well, these plants are doing just fine this year with no irrigation. What does that tell you? These plants are tolerant. You're worried about snow loads? Yeah, they break some and they keep coming back. So we need a lot more work done on this. We've found almost 1,000 pages of documents we'd like to get scanned and up on the web. We have our website, which is fledgling. We're trying to create more information. Anybody would like to be a bookworm for us? There's a bunch of library stuff scattered around the West Coast with Gillet in it. If you haven't gone to spend the time in those libraries to read all this stuff. And again, one word just to close up how you can help us out. These are the ways that you can help us keep this project going. I'd be happy to talk with you more in detail with Adam and Jennifer. I'm going to pass around our little simple little description of what we're doing. And it's got our website on it, and it's got our more information and kind of introduction to the Gillet. And then with that, a couple of questions, Howard?
Well, can you just touch on Gillet's social life with all the other horticulturists in the area? Because we know that the mine has, and North Star has, and the person where we reside, all those people were in the horticulture, and they all seem to be connected.
Yeah, they do. Now, that's unfortunately very little of that's documented.
Okay.
I mean, I find little bits and pieces, but that one somebody needs to do a history project on, because, yeah, you see him communicating with Mr. Burbank, and he was a prolific writer, and the ag mag of the day was called Pacific Rural Press. He wrote something every couple of weeks in there. And so that's how people communicated back in the day, was that everyone read that weekly, which came out of San Francisco, and it basically reported on the entire agricultural industry of California. But you don't see, I haven't found much between individuals written yet. And again, I'm not the librarian type. Someone needs to go spend a bunch of time in there. There's a bunch of stuff in the Bancroft Library, in the Oakland Museum, in the State Historical Library that I've seen, but people need to go in there and do the extraction and get us, and then we'll scan it up there. But that's a really good question, because there were other horticulturists, there were other nursery people, there were obviously lots of farmers, ranchers, miners, but how it all got communicated has so far, to my knowledge, not been discovered.
How did he handle all the shipping?
You know, that's a really good question. Although he was famed for his shipping, he actually guaranteed delivery, which in the 1800s. Apparently, they did it on stagecoaches, you know, and brought it over on ships. Yeah. Yeah, they did. He actually, well, two parts of that. He brought plants from all around the world, and we have receipts for him selling things to people in Michigan, in Russia, in Louisiana, in Washington, in Oregon. So he was able to sell plants all over. Now, how they got there? Well, first they did them when they're dormant in winter, so they travel better. But still, they might take a week or two to get there. Yeah, so you would have to pack them very carefully. He was very proud of it. We haven't seen any documentation, but in his catalogs he would say, we do the best job of packing so that it gives you in #1 shape. It takes a long time, way different than today.
And potatoes. Packed a lot of things with potatoes.
Potatoes, yeah, was one of his mediums. Which is, in fact, Paul Harar is doing a bunch of research on Felix and has posted the main stuff that's on Wikipedia. So give him credit. And Dexter, Desmond rather. Desmond's done a bunch on also collecting a timeline, and so we're getting some help on this. So I'm doing the Aggie part of it the best I can. The rest of it is a bunch of who else has got a question or comment? Let's work break up.
Did he do the drawing?
No, he hired people apparently. We do a lot of writing. We actually, now here's one I want to get published. We're all worried about the weather, right? Felix has a daily weather log for 40 years. A daily weather log. And you will be shocked at the weather of the 1890s. There's a period there in the 1890s that didn't rain for over a year. Okay, there's periods there where the temperatures in Nevada City never dropped below the 40s in the winter.
So this is, and of course, there's also periods where it was below zero, so you have these wide variations. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain some more questions in the lobby, and you can also come and have a taste of our fruits. And I think I've run myself out of time. Thank you very much.